Warm greetings to all of you who are joining us today, and welcome to this second half of our opening day of the Commitment to Justice in Jesuit Higher Education Conference 2021. My name is Joe Orlando, and I serve at Seattle University as Special Assistant to the Provost and in our AJCU network as co-chair of the 10-person National Steering Committee that has organized this conference.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Duffy. I'm the director of the McGrath Institute for Jesuit Catholic Education at the University of San Francisco. I'm also a co-chair alongside Joe of the National Steering Committee for this conference. We are very excited to see so many of you from across the globe that have joined us today for this live Q&A with our panel of AJCU leaders. As you know, this is the first of 6 plenary sessions during the next 3 weeks, and we hope that you will join us for those as well. We have an exceptional list of speakers and presenters who will share their insights with us on the state of justice in Jesuit higher education.
We are very aware as we gather together that we stand on the shoulders of many passionate and dedicated colleagues from past years, including those who helped organize and launch the very first Justice Conference at Santa Clara University in October of 2000, when Father Peter Hans Kolvenbach, then Superior General with the Society of Jesus, delivered his powerful address, The Service of Faith and the Promotion of Justice in American Jesuit Higher Education. Over 40 folks have served on the National Steering Committee over these 2+ decades, organizing conferences about every 4 years at various Jesuit campuses, and each time gathering hundreds of people, colleagues, with a goal to deepen and broaden, to strengthen and expand our shared commitment to this Jesuit mission imperative. We're really grateful to our host for this year's gathering, Georgetown University. So thank you, President DeGioia, for your hospitality and warm welcome to this conference. Thank you as well to Father Arturo Sosa, Superior General of the Society of Jesus, who has addressed us today at the start of this conference. We so appreciate the guiding inspiration of the Society of Jesus as we pursue this mission. This year is a milestone as the 20+1 conference, and it allows us to take a measure of where we stand in Jesuit higher education. How are we doing in our efforts to integrate this call into our lives as faculty and staff through our classes, our scholarship, through programs, educational and formational work with students in all forms, and through the life and practices of our institutions. Over 700 of us, and counting, will be gathering together over the course of these 3 weeks, which is both energizing and inspiring. Together, we represent faculty and staff colleagues from across the Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities, and we also have wonderful representation from colleagues across the broader global network. The International Association of Jesuit Universities, or IAJU. All colleagues, and we are all part of that association. To those of you who are joining from every time zone, every region, every country, we say our very warmest welcome. Bienvenidos, bienvenue. During the course of this conference, we will hear from a diversity of plenary speakers on each of the 6 days at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. During the first hour, we will open with the premiere of a plenary video presentation, and after a scheduled break at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, we will host a live question and answer session with our plenary speakers, before closing using the reflective practice of the Ignatian examen. We also want to draw your attention to over 50 posters prepared by colleagues from across the US and beyond, covering a wide range of topics and always available through a repository that is accessed on your registration website, through Sketch, hosted by Georgetown University. So please visit those posters and spend some time with them to learn more about some of the many justice efforts that are underway at our Jesuit institutions. Our 10-person group of dedicated steering committee members are so grateful for your presence and your time and your involvement. And Andrea Whistler and her talented hosting team at Georgetown University have created an amazing platform enabling us to virtually gather, connect, learn, and discover together. So let us open our minds, our hearts, our spirits to this special opportunity during this conference. A time to be encouraged, to be strengthened, to be nurtured by the Spirit, so that we can go forward in service to this special mission which we share in Jesuit higher education. So thanks very much again. And again, we're glad you have joined us. So now that we've extended a general welcome to the conference, let's pivot and move into this first live question and answer session, for which I will be serving as moderator. And thanks to our Georgetown team for recording this session, and to Andrea Whistler for helping to field questions from our attendees through the chat function. I expect that many with us today who have viewed the video premiere just a little while ago. And if you haven't, it's available through the conference registration website. And we encourage you to view it at any time. In that video, we heard from Father Arturo Sosa, Superior General of the Society of Jesus, as well as 3 leaders from the AJCU on the invitation to Jesuit universities at this moment as we mark the 20-year milestone since Father Kolvenbach's address, and also lean into our engagement with the universal apostolic preferences. And you see our 3 AJCU leaders joining me around the table here today. And before letting them introduce themselves, I'll just remind us of what the 4 preferences are, as Father Sosa reminded us in his video: showing a way to God through the spiritual exercises and discernment, walking with the excluded on a mission of reconciliation and justice, accompanying young people in the creation of a hope-filled future, and caring for our common home for the protection and renewal of God's creation. So while Father Sosa is not able to join us live, we do have these 3 wonderful leaders here who will be able to answer, engage with questions that you can share through the chat function. And so I'd like them to introduce themselves, and I'd like to turn first to you, Deborah.
Thank you, Joe and Mike and Andrea and team for the kickoff of a wonderful and important conference. You have all done a great job. I'm Deborah Mooney, Vice President for Mission Identity. I've had the joy of serving in this role, the joy and privilege of serving in this role for the past, 12 years.
Thanks, Deborah.
Yeah.
Rob.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rob Kelly. I serve as the Vice President and Special Assistant to the President here at Loyola University, Maryland. I oversee a variety of areas, everything from mission and identity to student development, external affairs, and planning. So I try to keep busy, but I love the place. It's my alma mater.
Thanks, Rob. And Margaret?
Hey, everybody. I'm really happy to join you today. I'm Margaret Frigie. I'm the Provost and Dean at the College of the Holy Cross. And I have been at Holy Cross since 1986 in a variety of roles.
Well, I'm honored to be with you, and we're going to have about 35 minutes to dive into some of the material that Father Sosa and the 3 of you brought forward, and we have a wonderful representation of folks who are going to bring their questions forward, but I get to ask the first one. So you all heard from one another these remarks that we shared, your own reflections on the moment we're in and these universal apostolic preferences. So my question is, what is one insight or challenge or invitation that you heard from one of the other panelists that are here at the table today that you found valuable or helpful, and why? So I'd like to turn first to Deborah.
Thank you. So I'm going to sneak in a couple here. I'll start with Rob's presentation. I really like the reminder as he mentioned accompaniment and then pivoted very quickly to encounter. That accompaniment commitment and encounter are connected. I think that's a wonderful reminder. And I love his 3 C's. It takes commitment, compassion, and it's a challenge. But I especially related to, or thought it was really important and helpful to be reminded of not setting important things aside. That's kind of a nice way of saying it as well. We need to focus on it now, as he said. We need to name it and lean into it. Take a long, I think of it as, yeah, the long living look at the real, especially as he's talking about, as it relates to race. I think we can say gender, sexual identity. That one really popped out at me. That quote popped out at me because as he was saying it, it reminded me of years ago, early in my 12 years. So probably even could have been as long as a decade ago. I facilitated a group on Catholic identity. We don't often do that at our Jesuit colleges and universities focused on Catholic identity. And I have to say, we focused kind of informational, but the next thing was challenges. And I found that people didn't always have the opportunity to talk about challenges, but in being able to do that, they could then quickly move to the treasures of our Catholic identity and universities. So I really underscore that we need to name it, and importantly, as he said, lean into it as we think about race. For Margaret, I appreciated her attention to noticing how far we have come from the 20 years ago, and as she said, to celebrate it, but then to also talk about where are we now, and we're still in that grittiness. And I thought that was very interesting that both of us picked that grittiness quote from 20 years ago, 21 years ago now. And I really appreciated how she named the grittiness that our students are experiencing right now. The divisiveness, divisions socially and politically. She talked about the difficulty in dialogue. That is so true. So many people mistaken dialogue for, I'm going to convince you of my opinion, right? And the decreasing respect, maybe even lack of respect in some instances of science and science, expertise, I think we could say, and the lack of patience for ambiguity. Those are tough things to think about. And sometimes we don't always put them in the bucket or category of justice issues. So I really appreciated her pulling that out. I also liked her connection for us of reminding us to think deeply about the word accompaniment and what that means. And she reminded us about the interconnection of the universal apostolic preferences. That reminded me of, I think Father Sosa has said at one point, he thinks of the universal apostolic preferences as a hand, the 4 preferences, and then the Holy Spirit. And so that's always an important reminder, because it's hard to go deep into any one of them without hitting the others, like our hand and palm. And then of course, the Jesuit education being both critical thinking and contemplative thinking.
Thank you, Deborah. That's beautiful reflections. Lots of things surfaced there. Rob, would you like to jump in?
Sure. I would echo a lot of what Deborah shared, but I guess my points that I took away from Deborah's talk had to do with asking the justice question. You know, how do you do that in a way that shows that you still care, you still have love, you see the humanity, and yet you're asking a really sometimes tough question around issues of justice. And I found that directly connected to Margaret's comment about contemplative and critical, that our students need to know how to do both, but we have to model it. And often I think sometimes you don't see, especially on via the camera or the screen, you don't see it modeled sometimes the way, while attendance might be up at all sorts of governance meetings because it's easier to engage. I think sometimes the way in which we ask questions of one another, the way we model it for one another, that's a bit of a challenge. And so I was taken aback with how do you do both? How do you do both of those? And I would love just to, if Margaret or Deborah would want to talk about that, I would love to hear more about that. But when I think about what I heard from both of them is how do we continue to do more to be a better campus, to be a better institution, to be a better place when we can look, we can point to things and we say, that didn't always work. That didn't work in the past. We didn't like that in the past. And so how do we now say, okay, we're coming out of this pandemic. We want to ask the tough questions. We want to ask the justice questions. We want to be contemplative and critical. How do we do both? So.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, they expect better. Isn't that what Margaret's language was? Expect better. So we can do better. So Margaret, I'll turn it over to you. What are some of your thoughts on these other folks on the panel?
I was struck by the fact that there were so many themes that resonated through all three of our talks. And I guess that in full disclosure, people should know that we actually didn't see each other's talks before today, right? So there's something about what was coming out there, right, that I think speaks to this moment in time, and I think there is something pretty powerful about that, and the ways in which we may be positioned to address the particular challenges we have. I really appreciated all of the things that Deborah and Rob have mentioned, but I also appreciated Rob's comment about we have to do democracy. That I think there's a call here that to not just theoretically frame this stuff and to not just talk about this stuff, but really think about this modeling question that Rob pointed to, right? How do we model what it is we want our students to do, whether it's those difficult dialogues, whether it's the asking the questions and yet doing it with empathy and love and generosity. I think there's a real call there for that. The other thing that I really appreciated Deborah reminding us of is cura propria, which I'm going to hold on to for, I think that often, in particular, the people who are involved in this conference, right, forget all about that, right? Care for self. And I think Deborah's right to remind us that we actually can't do any of the other work that we're called to do without having that be part of who we are and what we do and how we respond. So I think it's something that we should add alongside cura personalis and cura apostolica, as Deborah suggested, because I do think it's necessary for the work that would be done. The last thing I will say is that after seeing Father Sosa's talk, I'm really struck by, and actually Deborah and Rob both pointed to this, about this pandemic as the cannonball moment. And the question that I find myself confronting, right, is how does it actually become a cannonball moment as opposed to just a disruptive moment, right? Because the cannonball moment was a conversion moment, not just a disruption moment. We've certainly experienced the disruption moment. What does it take to make it a moment of actual conversion?
Well said. Well said. Thank you. Wow, I could just have a big conversation on any of these points that we're starting to get into, but we are sharing this conversation with some wonderful colleagues, Hither and Jan. So we're going to bring some questions in from that group. And I've been seeing them come across, and I'm going to ask if Andrea has been tracking if there's anything from off stage she'd like to add into the mix.
Thanks, Joe. Margaret, that's not the last thing you're going to say, because there's a few questions for you around your use of accompaniment as different than mentoring with kind of veteran faculty and our newer faculty. And you really brought to life faculty. So Joe, I'm actually wondering if you could say a little bit about the Jesuit understanding of accompaniment, which might be new to some folks, right, in this group. And then Margaret, the question is, there's been a few about what that means and what that looks like, particularly in the tenure and promotion process.
Sure. I mean, accompaniment is really at the very roots of who we are as inheritors of this cannonball moment and conversion. Thank you, Margaret, for bringing that in as well, because as Ignatius was starting to share the exercises, he did this as accompanying others in how they would discover the movement of the Spirit, God's presence, their relationship, that relationship in their lives that would then be transformative. So I imagine Ignatius with those early companions accompanying them through the exercises, and then as they accompanied one another in clarifying the movement of the Spirit and discerning the movement of the Spirit to become a group that would go forward and do work together. So accompaniment has these really deep roots in who we are. And I thought that was a really important point. What does it look like brought forward today onto our campuses? So anyways, I'll just say that and turn it over to Margaret.
Yeah, so I think that thinking about, right, what a spirit of accompaniment might mean, right, with respect to how we engage one another writ large and not just our students, right? I think that that with respect to our students, we have some understanding of what that relationship might look like. But when we think about accompanying one another as faculty and staff at the institution, those are the questions that come up, right? So what does this mean for tenure and promotion, right? How will we value this as an institution? And I think those are the questions that we have to talk through for sure. I do think, though, that from my perspective, one of the joys of thinking about this as accompaniment is that you are open to what that person is bringing to the table in ways that you may not be in another kind of relationship. I think that part of accompaniment is being attentive to the Spirit of God at work in this person that you're accompanying, right? So that so what that does is open up the possibility of valuing even more what the person brings to the table, right? What the person brings to the table. And as I was thinking about it, it really is, I think, the way in which the mission can live, right, is that we come to understand our own missions better when we understand better the ways in which people are bringing their full selves to that mission, and how they understand that mission, and how we see that mission alive in them. And so I think that it just opens up different possibilities for the ways in which we all come to own the mission of our institutions.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Rob or Deborah, do you have a word or a thought about what accompaniment means, what the call is for that? And no problem if not, because there are plenty of other questions that are coming at us.
I'm not sure I have anything to add that Margaret hasn't brought forth.
Wonderful. Let's take up another question then, Andrea. Is there anybody tapping on a key theme that they'd like to have these panelists pick up?
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, this was a question for you, actually, from Susan Herman at Loyola Chicago. Susan, if you're there and you would like to offer the question yourself, please feel free to do so. And it was specifically about this idea of Ignatian citizenship, which I was like, oh, I can't wait for this class in our political science department. But and you've talked about our polarized world, and we have so many colleagues from Peru on this call and in our live premiere, and they were saying the same thing about the polarized context they're living in. So I'm going to hand it over to Susan. Susan, go ahead and state your question.
Yeah, hi Rob, good to see your face. It's been a couple of years, to say the least. So I think one, would just love to hear you, I think, crack open the idea of Ignatian citizenship a little bit more, but really specifically, when thinking about that, and particularly thinking about our current political environment, I think the fact that it is polarized is not a revelatory statement. That is something almost all of us can agree on. Conversations about reconciliation become more important than ever, but I think they get really interesting, because in many cases it can be very tempting, especially when that conversation is coming from a person with a lot of privilege. It can make reconciliation a simple saying like, let's not disagree in public anymore. Let's all be quiet. So for you, I'd love to know, how does reconciliation through an Ignatian citizenship lens look different, especially when it's with an eye to conversations between groups who hold a lot of privilege and groups who have been, are being currently or have traditionally been oppressed?
Yeah, sure. And that's a great question. You know, we've been talking about that idea here at the institution, and I think some of the conversation started with the murder of Freddie Gray. I was a trustee at the time, so I wasn't here on campus when that occurred. And it's really getting our students and encouraging them and uplifting the ones who already see it, but encouraging others to get to that point of, we are connected. No matter how you look at it, we're connected. And as we rise, it will only happen insofar as we can rise together and we can journey and move along with each other together. In so many ways, the world is broken and inhumane. And so how do we encourage our students, get our faculty to talk about it more and give examples about it within the classroom, and even model it as administrators and faculty and staff? How do we do that for our students, to see them as they have to be committed to seeing themselves as connected to something greater, but it has to lead to action. It just can't be that they recognize the smallness of the world. We talk about the diverse and changing world, learn leading and serving. It can't be that. It has to lead towards action that improves the lives of somebody else. And I think sometimes even within our students, it's easy to point out what someone else is not doing and where someone else may have fallen short. And it's much harder to see the humanity in someone who failed, and yet we're committed to doing better together and moving forward together. So it's really both sides. And when I think about Margaret's comment earlier about it's the heart and the head, really needing both of it. And I think that maybe that is the hallmark of what we do differently in Jesuit higher education. I think some people are gonna figure out ways to deal with the brain part of it, the intellectual part of it. And other places are gonna do the heart part. But how do we do both and integrate both into a way that, whether it's giving our students, helping them to see hope and potential and promise within the world, but it has to be connected to action. They just can't study it. They have to be in it, get their hands dirty, be told you're racist, you're homophobic, you're sexist, whatever the case might be, and then do better. Learn from that experience and do better.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you. I actually also saw a question come through the chat that might be something Deborah wants to comment on specifically, and it comes from Kathleen Moss-Weiger from Loyola University Chicago, and she was one of the founders actually, and she picked up, Deborah, on the piece that you mentioned in your remarks, your taped remarks, about the universal apostolic preferences and the fact that women are not directly mentioned. And she said, how can we all lift that up and not let it slide as we continue the work for justice? And I thought you might want to just expand on that a little bit.
Well, I have to say that when they came out, I was facilitating a group that was over a couple of days, and we were discussing them. And but I had noticed in the midst of this, when we were looking very closely, that women was not mentioned. The word, I actually Googled it in case I was, or did a word search in case I was missing women, woman. And I have to say that surprises me. And how I worded it is very much, I would love the opportunity to ask Father Sosa why, and have the energy to listen. And I think I do, but that's kind of where that comes from. There is a reason. we know that from other documents when the idea of including women comes up, and there are reasons for that. And it's helpful to know those reasons. I know he has been working on it. I know there is a committee on women, but I just think it's important to say it. It kind of relates to what I pulled from Rob's presentation, that we need to name it and we need to lean into it. So I just think it's important that we state that it wasn't, and not with, so that we can take a long, loving look at the real.
Well said. And you're mentioning Rob, and I'm remembering in his remarks, he talked about making sure we hear the voices. We lift up the voices. So the question ends up being, what voices are being left out? And let's make sure they're not left out if we're really going to proceed together, right? And go forward. So thank you for that. Are there other questions that you've been seeing, Andrea, that you'd like to bring forward to the panel?
Yeah, there's been a few questions, Deborah, actually, back to you, that have come in, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Ryan Craig from the Berkeley Center at Georgetown, who's helping me with this and has received some of those questions.
Thanks, Andrea. We have another question for Deborah, and it's kind of along the same lines, and I thought this was a wonderful question. I'm really curious to know your response and the other panelists' thoughts as well. So this question comes from Erica Kirby, and she asks if Deborah can tell us a little bit more about what you meant with the question, how does intersectionality hamper complete anti-racism success?
Well, I'll say it is pleasant. I think it's good it's good on our parts as the Jesuit Network to be focusing on racism and anti-racism. And we have a lot of discussion groups, book groups, commitments, you name it. We don't often talk about issues that come from our connection to the Catholic Church and its relationship to women and sexual identity, sexual orientation. And so if we can't talk about all of them equally, it will be hard to be successful in any one and any ism, any identity. And so I lay that out there. I don't have answers. I really put those questions in because, again, that idea, the invitation to speak of it and lean in, I decided, and I really was thoughtful about that. That is not a typical style that I have, but this is the Commitment to Justice Conference, and we need to lean in and talk about some things. I don't know what others think. I'm sure you probably related to that in a similar way, I would guess.
I was just going to add, I think it's easy when we walk into a situation and in a discussion around justice issues, and we're talking about our marginalized identity, whatever that one might be. And so I find myself, I have to often push myself to make sure I recognize that I carry privilege as a man walking in the room, or the way I might say something. And yet, for me, my most salient identity is that I'm Black. And I think it will be different for every single person in terms of how they look at it, but bring that information with us, and having that knowledge and awareness allows us to really begin to really confront some issues and deal with issues as we have policies and programs and procedures on our own campuses. And so for me, that's what I took away from that comment, remembering not only where I might be marginalized, but also where I do experience some privilege.
Yes, thank you so much, Rob, for weighing in. Margaret, did you want to engage that as well?
Yeah, I think that, you know, Deborah is bringing up some really, for me, resonant questions, right, around that I think are related deeply to, you know, we talk a lot about the political tensions that we're living in. We talk a lot about the structures that are challenging, right, on a civic level, but I think that the reality is that we're in a very challenging time for Catholicism, and we are Catholic Jesuit institutions, right? We're Jesuit Catholic institutions, right? We have that as well, and I think that sometimes those challenges are harder for us to speak about and talk about than some of the challenges that are more civic challenges, let me put them that way. And they're not disconnected challenges, right? They are part and parcel of the ways in which there's a reckoning that institutions and that structures that we need to deal with. And I think that, but I do think that there are certain places that we, even though the conversations are harder, there are certain places where we feel a little bit more comfortable than other places. And I think keeping that balance of both holding up the particulars of what we have confronted over throughout history, but certainly what has been most present over the last several years with regard to the racial inequality in this country and everywhere else, right? We can't let go of that. And at the same time, we need to remember, right, that there are these other things, right, that we also need to struggle with and deal with. And so, so that both end, right? How do you keep both of those in mind at the same time is a huge challenge.
Thank you, Margaret. And actually for each of you for weighing in on that. That's a really important question that we're kind of stirring up and exploring together. You know, there was an earlier question that I saw that we haven't touched on yet. And I know this was directed toward Margaret, but it could also be either Robin, and Deborah might want to weigh in as well. But it has to do with something that you noted, Margaret, in your remarks about accompanying young people can include accompanying younger faculty. And so the question comes from Margaret, pardon me for my pronouncement, Kathy Boucher, I think. How would you describe the accompaniment of veteran faculty with new faculty? How does that look different than a mentor-mentee relationship? So really, what might accompaniment of younger faculty in the spirit of the universal apostolic preferences look like?
Well, again, I've got more questions than answers here, but I'll take a stab at what it might look like. So my sense is that often the mentor-mentee relationship between sort of more established faculty and newer faculty, I guess I would say it's a little bit modeled on the relationship between a thesis advisor and a graduate student. There's a sense in which, right, one party is has a certain level of expertise and is working with somebody else, right, to draw out their strengths. But it's not an equal relationship in any sense of the word, right? I mean, there's and so I guess that for me, accompaniment, right, has a certain openness to it, right? Where and probably the best mentoring relationships do, but I think that the more typical way we think about mentoring relationships, there's not enough openness to the fact that in fact you, the mentor, right, should be changed, right? Accompaniment should change us, the mentor, right? Not just the mentee, I guess is the way I would say. And so you have to be open to that possibility, that in fact, that you will be changed in that relationship. I don't know that that's the standard way we kind of structure those things.
Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate your opening that up. Believe it or not, our time has zipped by, but we do have time for this one last question, and I'm so grateful to receive this question from a global colleague from La Ruiz. And I'm going to read the question and then invite each of you to share a few thoughts about this. And then we're going to be needing to wrap up. But of course, the conversation will be continuing. But here goes. While we recognize that there are parts of the world that are coming out of the pandemic, many parts of the world still have a long way to go. Even when we come out of the pandemic, the economic effects and political effects may be so great, we may not be able to participate in international spaces like before. How can we continue to foster empathy, immersions, and dialogue? So how about if each of you take a turn in reflecting on that?
Joe, can I jump in and add
Please.
a little bit from
Yes.
another colleague, Stephen, who I just thought it really co-paralleled really nicely with Lauren's question from La Ruiz in Lima, Peru. But Stephen actually brings us back to Seattle, Joe. And so that's why I also wanted to bring it up where he said, Stephen, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read your message. How would panelists respond to the question raised so clearly at our proceedings in Seattle in 2017? In which, should we emphasize understanding those with whom we disagree or confronting those with whom we disagree, which I feel like goes along with Lauren's question about how do we continue to do this work around dialogue. And he asked a more difficult question: how have we progressed at all in closing the gap between these two strategies or modeling them? Is it always possible to do both in our current challenging time of hyper-partisan politics? So Lauren was talking about the political context of coming out of the pandemic and how that's different for all of us, and whether, the values of empathy, immersion, and dialogue, how we can continue them. And I think Stephen is also asking that in the kind of looking back to 2017, which it gave me a flood of memories from that meeting.
Right. Well, great. So there's a couple of access points there. We only have a little bit more time, but time for each of you to share a kernel of insight and invitation on any of these, each of these.
I would just offer two, observations. And Michelle Murray from Holy Cross will remember this from graduate school. We had a professor who often said to find the truth in what you oppose and the error in what you believe. And I think it's really important that as we were talking with students about, the torn fabric of our society, to at least kind of step back for a moment and see why the other person might be right about something. But when I think about the ways in which, we quote unquote, we are coming out of this pandemic, it's really uneven. Even if you look at the nation right now, we're really lucky here in Maryland. Over 70% of the population has received the vaccine, but it's completely depends on where you are in the country, let alone where you are in the world. And so maybe one of the blessings of technology has allowed us to still stay somewhat connected. And how do we give our students an experience of immersion that truly might be global? And when I say global, I mean just kind of somewhere doesn't have to necessarily be outside of the country. And so I think how do we depend upon more of the resources of the AJCU or the International Association? That might be an opportunity as we begin to think about coming out of the pandemic.
This reminded me of the saying, the question, what is a Jesuit university? And the answer is, university asks itself, what is a Jesuit university? And in some ways, I think, how do we continue to educate for empathy, dialogue, and immersion is to keep asking the question, how can we today, in this context, educate for empathy, dialogue, and immersion?
Thank you. Margaret, last thoughts.
I guess the one thing I would say is that maybe we shouldn't be thinking about coming out of the pandemic. Maybe we should be thinking about taking the pandemic with us. Because I think that the reality is that the pandemic has taught us some things, right? Or has at least shined a bright light on some stuff, right? That we preferred to keep in the darkness. And so maybe the question is to really think about what it means to take this with us as we move forward. And what is it that we bring from this pandemic as we think about what it means to provide a Jesuit education, right? Or an immersive education, or an education that encounters the world.
Well, it's beautiful. And I'm reminded of the fact that at this Ignatian year, we're talking about a cannonball moment, but as Margaret helped us point out, it was the beginning of a conversion experience that actually was an ongoing conversion, in the same way that this is an ongoing conversation. Deborah, you pointed out, it's an ongoing commitment to who we are to be able to grow into, how we're supposed to grow into this mission. So there's been a beautiful way that in this panel and through your plenary offerings with Father Sosa this morning, you've really opened up questions and possibilities that are going to be there for us in an ongoing way. And the more we engage and explore together, the more we're going to grow and discover. So I just want to say, I'm sorry, we're going to have to draw this to a close, but this has been a beautiful way to open this Justice Conference. And I'm really, really grateful to each of you, Deborah, to Rob, Margaret. As leaders in the AJCU, you inspire us with how you lead and with how you take this mission forward. And we know that you're out there continuing to do that work, and we're so grateful for you and for that. So I want to say thank you as we sort of put a close to the panel time and shift to our closing. So thanks again. So as we say goodbye to our panelists, I'm really grateful to welcome another colleague. Jennifer Abe is the Vice President at Loyola Marymount University, and for her title is Vice President for Intercultural Affairs at Loyola Marymount. And Jennifer, we're so grateful that you are here to lead us in an examen. And for those of you who are new to the examen, I'd like to just share a brief overview and then turn it over to Jennifer. But the committee decided that a beautiful way to close each session would be to do an Ignatian examen. And it's for those of you who are not familiar, it's a brief reflective prayer practice. It focuses on attuning ourselves to the presence of God and to the movement of grace in our daily lives. So it's really a foundational element in Ignatian spirituality, and it's something that we'd like to integrate into the practice of this conference experience. So we're really grateful to have our colleagues from across the AJCU lead us in the examen, and today here to lead us is Jennifer Abe. So Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you everyone for your thoughtful remarks and for the day. I want to acknowledge my partnership with Father Wayne Negretti at LMU in developing this examen for today. I'm going to speak in the first person, and I invite you to close your eyes or shut off your Zoom to use these words as part of your own prayer, taking time in this space to pay attention to what is emerging for you. So let us begin with thanksgiving and the recognition I am in the presence of God who is loving me into existence. Take a deep breath, inhaling slowly and fully, pausing before exhaling. Keep attention on your breathing as we move through the next few minutes of this examen. I breathe in this day as a gift from God. I breathe out my weariness. I breathe in the call to justice, to solidarity, and to the apostolic preferences I have received anew today. I breathe out my anxieties and limitations. I breathe in the moments that resonate in my being, including any cannonball moments that may come my way, shifting my plans and trajectory as happened for St. Ignatius years ago. I breathe out my desire for control, opening myself to the possibility of conversion. Take a moment now to notice the gifts from today's session that are beginning to emerge in your consciousness. I allow these gifts to be present to me and to rest deeper in my heart and express my gratitude to God for them. I ask for greater awareness of how God is present in my experience and how God is moving within me in my life. And I ask for a renewed consciousness of the 4 universal apostolic preferences and for what they might mean for me in my life. First, to show the way to God through the spiritual exercises and discernment. Second, to seek a path with the poor, with those marginalized and outcast, with those whose dignity has been violated, in a mission of reconciliation and justice with one another, with nature, with God. Third, to accompany our young people towards creating a future that is filled with hope. Fourth, to care for Earth, our common home. So I allow my memory to scan today's session and open myself now to recalling moments I became aware of, ideas that challenged or unsettled me, emotions directing my attention to places in me in need of more work and healing, of actions, whether realized now or held for the future, which hold meaning for me. What were these moments for me? How might God be moving in me? We'll take a minute to reflect. And now, I express gratitude to God for the ways in which I am being invited to join in God's desire for all people to be united and reconciled, treated with dignity and justice, and to share in the blessings and responsibilities for being a part of God's creation and creative activity on earth. I express sorrow for the ways in which I have hardened my heart and have been complicit in structures and systems that work against God's desire for all people to be united and reconciled, treated with dignity and justice, to share in the blessings and responsibilities for being part of God's creation and creative activity on earth. I ask for God's healing and forgiveness as I seek transformation, not only of my own words and deeds, but is part of a social fabric that is oriented towards healing, reconciliation, and justice in a polarized world. As part of a greater work to seek to make old things new, so that we may be able to see each other in our full humanity, accompanying each other with commitment and compassion. For this I pray. Breathing in and out. I recognize that God loves me unconditionally and desires me to be a part of God's creative action in the world. I affirm that God allows me to grow and invites me to be an instrument for justice, especially racial justice and reconciliation, to participate in cultivating communities of love and mercy, where we accompany each other, our students, with authenticity and spiritual depth. I express gratitude to God for God's creative life in me. And now I ask God to help me in what particular area of my life at my institution or in my community do I seek God's help. And in closing, breathing in again, I offer God my receptive heart, seeking mind, open eyes, and listening ears as a sign of my desire to be part of God's creative action in the world, of transformation and reimagination towards a future filled with hope. I desire and humbly seek of God to be an instrument of justice and a partner in reconciliation, to risk encounter and the unknown towards a new narrative of hope in the time that is granted to me on this earth. Amen.
Amen. And Jennifer, thank you so much. I found that to be a beautiful, beautiful way for us to gather the graces of this day and to recommit ourselves going forward. So thank you again for leading us in the examen today. It's a real blessing. So to all of you who have joined us today, I want to just say a few final closing words, reminders, and then to look forward to Thursday. First, that the complimentary registration will continue to be open throughout this conference because it's stretched over 3 weeks. People can join anytime. So please share the registration link and encourage folks to attend. And it's complimentary, as you know. Social media is one of the ways to share word of the conference, and we're very grateful to our colleagues at the Ignatian Solidarity Network for their partnership on this. And just please use hashtag AJCUJustice21 and hashtag JusticeEducated to share with your networks. The online repository, which I mentioned earlier, it has posters from our faculty and staff colleagues from many AJCU institutions. So it's going to be available throughout this conference. So please visit it via the Schedule page, the registration site, and discover more about what our colleagues are up to, what's going on. And thanks once again to our panelists, to Father Sosa, to Deborah and Rob and Margaret, to our examen leader, Jennifer, to Andrea Whistler and her Georgetown University team. It took many, many hands to bring this to fruition, to this opening of this Justice Conference. It feels very consoling to have begun together in this way. So we hope that you will join us and whoever else you can invite This Thursday at 2 p.m. again is the live video premiere, and at Eastern Time, and at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time will be the live Q&A session. And the topic then is spirituality and justice in Jesuit higher education, and that's with Father Tom Smolich of the Society of Jesus. So we look forward to you joining us then and to continuing in this conference. So thanks, everyone. It's great to be with you. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Joe.